Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us your time today for VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by David Heaney in London, broadcasting the show for us today as we discuss the next steps in personal computing. I'm wearing a Quest 3 and we're using David Heaney's VR studios with hand tracking and meta avatars. We'll be back on Tuesday with a pre-recorded episode from Don Hopper and I discussing Ready at Dawn's closure and the upcoming VR showcase at Gamescom. We've got a tablet in front of us showing us live comments. So if you have any questions about VR, put it out there and our community might be able to help you. Or we'll try to address your comments through the course of the show. Thank you to our members for supporting our work directly, and you can find us on your podcast platform of choice. Hello to Arlen, Clay, and everyone else tuning in, King Jellofish. Thank you so much. David, what do we have today?
So today we're going to start by talking about Pico teasing announcing its next headset on August 20th. So pretty soon we could be seeing Pico 4S potentially announced. We'll then talk about HTC cutting the price of Vive XR Elite from $1,100 to $900 in the US. We'll talk about my hands-on impressions of Varjo XR-4, the headset the company claimed provides VR and MR indistinguishable from natural sight. We will have a short section then where we talk about training and simulation. So we will first talk about the fact that a flight simulator rig using VR has got FAA qualification for the first time, and we'll talk about the significance of that for the industry and what that means. We'll talk about how firefighters are training using VR and haptic heat vests, so a much safer way of training for these dangerous situations. And we'll finish off by talking, of course, about PlayStation VR2. The PC adapter started shipping yesterday. We have a review on UploadVR.com, and we have an article explaining that if you have a certain graphics card, if you have a graphics card with the Virtual Link USB-C port, you don't even need the adapter to use PSVR2 on PC. So the final section of this show will be all about PlayStation VR2 on PC.
Yeah, we will be building towards that big discussion. I'm sure we'll have a lot of comments and a lot of curiosity about PSVR 2 on PC. We'll see those comments, I think, come in over the course of the show, people tuning in. Please do share out the link to this show to people who are new to VR or making that leap from PSVR to PC for the first time. We'll try to address any of those common questions when we get to that discussion. I'm seeing people trying to find the adapter and having trouble getting their hands on it in our comments. That is a bummer. And I think people are excited to talk about Pico as well. They want to know right at the start here where we're going with Pico. So what is your expectations here? Because I have 3 or 4 questions core in my mind that Pico needs to answer and needs to try to show an answer to. And I wanted to see what you have to say about what your expectations are first before I ask those questions, because I don't know if they're going to answer them, but I do think we've got a couple questions we need answered.
Sure, let's just start by running down what we think they're going to announce based on all the leaks and indications we've seen over the past year. So as early as last September, there were images leaked on Chinese social media showing ringless Pico controllers, ringless in the same way that Quest 3's controllers are ringless. And at the time, we thought that was for a Pico 5, but then in December, we got this report from the information that said that ByteDance had actually cancelled Pico 5 because Pico 4 had fallen short of its expectations. And instead, the plan was to release a refreshed version of Pico 4. And that's what we think they're going to be announcing at this event. So in March, they trademarked Pico 4S, the exact name Pico 4S, and icons of these ringless controllers were found in Pico's PC software, and they were actually labeled 4S controllers. So we see that name Pico 4S in 2 places there. Then in June, if you watch the show or if you read UploadVR.com, you'll know that we saw the first real specs leak where a Geekbench result, that benchmarking tool, indicated that this thing is going to use the same Snapdragon XR2 Gen 2 chipset as Quest 3 and the upcoming Quest 3S. but paired with 12 gigabytes of RAM. So that's more than Quest 3's 8 gigabytes. A few weeks later, South Korea's National Radio Research Agency regulator certified a new Pico headset showing that it had 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi. So this thing will either have Wi-Fi 6E like Quest 3 or even potentially Wi-Fi 7 if Pico wants to up the ante even more. And so more recently, we saw a image shared on Chinese social media again that shows the 3 Pico 4 headsets we know of, right? These two are sold in the West, Pico 4 and Pico 4 Enterprise. In China, they sell Pico 4 Pro, which is basically Pico 4 Enterprise, but for consumers. And we see this new headset here marked not Pico 4S, but Pico 4 Ultra. And you see these same ringless controllers that were leaked and a very similar design, except 2 cameras at the front here. The Pico 4 normal series has just a mono 1 color camera. It looks like this new headset is going to have stereo pass-through and ringless controllers and the new chipset. As for the naming confusion, we don't know what's going to happen here. Maybe Pico saw that Meta is going to use S in Quest 3S to mean lower end and decided we don't want our product to seem lower end. This is a higher end headset. We're going to use Ultra. Or it could be a case of different naming in China versus the West, just in the same way that in China you have this Pro and in the West it's just sold as Enterprise.
Yeah, so my core questions here, and I'm seeing it kind of hinted at by some of our commenters, sort of wondering the same things. How many countries will this upcoming product ship in? How inexpensive is it going to be without controllers, and is that going to be an option? And how well will the OS work with gamepads? I'm curious to see how Pico answers those questions, what it does differently or the same as, let's say, Android XR or Horizon OS from Meta. There's places to differentiate what they do, and there are places to share a common framework for how this stuff is handled. And that's a big opportunity to build a platform that's built smartly for these things, right? If you can take command of your keyboards and your gamepads and your existing computer architecture, if you've got a PC VR and virtual desktop, you are ready to go in a lot of great experiences, no matter what headset you're using, including Pico headsets. And people forget that or don't give it a lot of thought because Pico stopped in its push towards the West in its last iteration, and that's going to be one of the core questions here.
Yeah, I think I agree with the comments here saying that if this doesn't sell in the US, it's going to be pretty much the exact same situation as Pico 4. There's nothing's going to radically change here, right? Because Pico 4 came out before Quest 3, a full year before, with those pancake lenses, with dual 2K panels. Pico 4 when it launched was roughly the same price, but better significantly than Quest 2. So even if Pico 4S or Ultra or whatever this thing is called, has these slightly better specs than Quest 3 with more RAM and maybe better Wi-Fi, things like that, it's not a massive game changer still, because the biggest problem is that Pico Store, right? There already is virtual desktop on the Pico Store, but that's not what people are mainly buying these standalone headsets for. It's for using native on-device apps, and that's where Pico's Store just faltered, right? They initially put in this funding wave to bring over a huge percentage of the Quest Store. We can't ignore the fact that they did bring over all of the best non-exclusive titles, or most of the best non-exclusive titles came over to Pico Store over time. But what they failed to do was then build their own exclusives. We know that they were working on a Beat Saber competitor, and they laid off everyone and canceled the project. We know that they originally were going to be the company behind Just Dance VR, as in the funder, Ubisoft's Just Dance VR, but then they pulled out and Meta picked up the project, and now that's going to be a Quest exclusive. Pico is clearly not committed to the funding here. And to me, this thing just seems like is going to be released because why not, right? If you look at this design, assuming this is the design that we see on Chinese social media, this is just the same headset, but with 2 cameras instead of 1, ringless controllers, and an upgraded chipset. This is the bare minimum that they could do to release an update. It probably doesn't really, on the grand scheme of things, cost that much compared to developing a radically new Pico 5 to just swap out specs here. And I think this is them just keeping the platform on life support, because right now Pico 4's biggest disadvantage is that it is on that old generation chipset. But maybe they surprise us and they launch in the US this time. But if they don't, nothing's going to change here.
Yeah, people are wondering why we start when we mean to. We start an hour later, typically at Gamescast on Tuesdays, and this is a flip. We've also flipped the days so that we do VR download on Thursdays instead of Tuesdays. So we've changed things around on you, even though we're this, avatars in a studio, and we will be again back on Tuesdays with VR Gamescast at that other time, and we're going to try to start scheduling the YouTube videos out as much as we can in advance so people know when we're going to be here. Hello to Geek Odin from Virtual Desktop. David, what's up?
Yeah, just to be crystal clear to our audience, I don't think you made that quite clear. This is our normal time now. If you look at UploadVR.com and you click at podcasts, you can see our regular time for each of our shows. This 9 a.m. PT on Thursdays is now our regular time for VR download. So we're not starting early, actually. We're starting exactly the same time as always. 9 a.m. Pacific, Thursdays, VR download.
Yeah, we'll start promoting the consistent time for VR Gamescast as we're zeroing in on that. But let's talk about, I think, this next subject pretty soon, because we've got to kind of see what Pico has to announce here. We've outlined a lot of great questions that we want to get answered on exactly what they're going to do. I saw one of our commenters bringing up, was it Just Dance? I saw both names of those titles of gaming brands, and it confused me. I saw Dance Central mentioned and Just Dance, but I think the title that was Pico exclusive for a little while was Just Dance, and now it's coming to Meta resurrected or help finish that project, and it cuts me to the core right there. I've brought this up multiple times on this show. Meta came on, was it last year or the year before, and showed the fake legs up on stage, the CGI legs, while announcing that their platform would support legs. Well, what we've got today, David, are fake legs, basically, inside headset, where you need real legs to really track dancing. If you want a game like Dance Dance Revolution in VR, there have been entire accessory markets of hundreds of dollars for Dance Dance Revolution mats. I feel like it's such an obvious market for VR to consume and make better, but Just Dance and these first VR games that have come out haven't used your legs as fundamentally as that. Let's see. You ready to talk about the next subject, David?
Yeah, I'll just go over a few comments first. Yeah, it is Just Dance, to be clear, that exclusive that Pico was funding that was going to come over to Pico, but is now being picked up by Meta as Pico have dropped it. Right now, these dance games in VR, there was one that was out for the original Oculus Quest at launch. They're all just focusing on upper body dancing because, as you rightly point out, these headsets don't have leg tracking. Just to pick up on a comment here from Geek Odin, the developer of Virtual Desktop, this isn't official. This image was leaked on Chinese social media, so we don't even know that it's going to be called Pico 4 Ultra in the West. All indications so far is Pico 4S, but we'll have to just see what happens when they do announce this thing. We're just talking today about the fact that Pico has teased that there is going to be a new product launch on August 20th. Pico themselves have not actually said anything yet. I notice my hand tracking is jumping around. I wonder what that is. But yeah, I think the last thing to say is that same information report that we referred to back in December that first said that Pico 5 was cancelled and instead they're going to have a Pico 4 refresh, what we're seeing here, that same information report also indicated that this short-term pullback by Pico, this less ambition in the short term with content and with their headset, was actually a longer-term strategy, and that what they now reportedly plan to do is build a Apple Vision Pro competitor codenamed Project Swan. And so that's supposed to come in a few years. So it looks like for now, Pico is trying to do the bare minimum to keep the platform going until they're ready to release this Project Swan headset to take on Vision Pro, presumably a few years down the line.
Yeah, I don't follow it. This core question from Seam, or this comment, they can't compete unless they actually invest into the software. Non-exclusive ported games and a Quest copycat won't cut it with nothing new. And that's what they're saying there is going to hold so much weight when they actually get to the announcement, right? They already did this. They did this with Just Dance. They had their big time to shine and say, here, we're throwing money and funds at this. We're actually going to give this a push. And it completely fell flat. How can they really expect to do more now?
Well, I think the difference is because a Vision Pro competitor, ironically, actually needs less software investment than a Quest competitor. If you want to build a gaming platform, right? If you were, say, Amazon for some reason wanted to build a competitor to PlayStation and Xbox, like a real console, they would have to spend an enormous amount of money to bring over games and to release their new ones, right? It's the same dynamic, but on a slightly smaller scale with Quest. If you want to develop your own standalone gaming platform like Pico tried, the content investment there is enormous. In comparison, if you just want a spatial computing and virtual screens platform like what Vision Pro is currently focused around, you need a web browser, you need to convince a few streaming services, and then the rest over time. And ideally, you want to bring in an Android store. That's going to, again, be Pico's big problem. Maybe they try to do a partnership with Android XR and bring that in, but they need less content funding to build a Vision Pro competitor than a Quest competitor. They need a lot more hardware funding, right? You need to do a lot more hardware work, but a lot less content, strangely.
Yeah, I don't know how much I want to derail us right now, but I do think side-loading Android APKs is going to become an interesting area for us to watch very closely in these next few months. It is one of the superpowers or hidden superpowers of the current headsets, but some of the news that we're going to discuss later in the show is in conflict a little bit with side loading things that come from untrusted sources. So we'll get to that in a little bit. I think we've got to talk about this price cut here soon. Any comments you want to talk about first?
Yeah, no, I just want to finish off by saying that it is valid to say that, on a Pico headset right now or on a Quest, you can sideload a lot of these Android applications, but that's always going to be a power user thing, right? There's a big difference between having the Play Store in front of you and being able to click and also to buy applications that cost money to be able to transact, subscribe to services, do all that in the headset and have all your automatic updates versus sideloading. It's great that it's possible, but it's never going to be the same thing as having a proper Play Store or App Store in your headset, and certainly not the way that Apple has it right now, where you're using the same App Store to browse Vision OS and iPad apps in one, and having that work so seamlessly. But yeah, we'll have to see what Pico does in future. And unless you have anything to add, let's definitely start talking about that brief Vive XR Elite news.
Yeah, this is of course HTC's latest moves, and the typical cadence for HTC is to kind of drip news out until CES comes around, and then start the cycle again with a new headset or a new offering towards the next year. But this is before that. This is what they've got currently on their lineup and the pricing that they're asking for it. David, why don't you walk us through it?
It's interesting that HTC and Pico are somewhat in similar situations, right? As some of the commenters have been saying already, it does look like there's going to be this massive three-way platform war between Apple Vision, Meta Horizon, and Google's Android XR. And then you have the also ran off in the corner, which is the Pico platform and the Vive platform, because this is a standalone headset. Vive has their own platform too, but they have an even smaller percentage of the Quest Store titles available on this thing. And this is, HTC's first ever consumer standalone headset. All the standalones they built before were sold only to businesses and intended for businesses. This thing is also sold to businesses too, but the difference is that they also decided to sell it to consumers. The problem is there's really very few reasons that anyone would pick this up over a Quest or a Pico, right? So they've taken the price down from 1100 to 900, which brings it $100 below Quest Pro, right? Which is probably its closest direct competitor. But with Quest Pro, you get face and eye tracking built in. And if you want to add face and eye tracking to this thing, you can do it, right? There's nothing actually stopping you from doing that. It's just that it costs you 200. So you actually get back up to the same price, more than Quest Pro, for less content, less clear lenses, a lower field of view. The advantages of the advantage of this thing realistically is that it has, the one that I can think of is that it has native support for the Vive Ultimate trackers, including in VR chat. So without a PC, you can get this thing, strap a few Vive Ultimate trackers to you, and have body tracking in VR chat. It's pretty cool that you can do that, right? The Quest version of VR chat does not support that. The PC version obviously does, but the Quest Store version doesn't. But is that really a big enough market? It's just this thing just doesn't offer any reason the consumer would buy it over its competitors. The main point of a product, right?
Yeah. Very, very. But the funny thing, like I'm seeing Blair in our comments quoting big platform war as this massive platform war. It's what's funny to think about is there's a product like the Quest Pro that comes out from Meta, and we call it an absolute failure, and it is an absolute failure. At $1,500 or $1,000, it's still the wrong thing, and yet like it's arguably still better than what the competition provides when you start bundling in all the extra things that thing offers as a base. So you've got Meta with still missing its product plans. Like it's not sending the not right making the right products for the right audience at the right prices. How can anyone else hope to do better than a company that has this full package at the outset? It like Quest Pro is better because of all this whole rounded out package. I can go put the Quest Pro on right now and expect the vast majority of games and experiences that are on the platform to run on it. And that wouldn't be the case for any competing system that hasn't made the effort to bring in all these devs to their platform. So that's headwind. Those are things blocking anyone from providing anything competing in terms of a package that anyone wants to buy.
Yeah, exactly. ByteDance, the owner of Pico, ByteDance being the same company behind TikTok, does have the money to compete with Quest if they want to. For a while, they had the appetite, and you saw an era where they were throwing money at developers to get games on their platform. That appetite is weakened. Their investors do not have the same long term view that Meta's Mark Zuckerberg does of this, and HTC simply doesn't have the money, right? You can't really blame HTC for not being able to compete in the consumer space. They don't have the funds to pay developers to bring up all that content, never mind to fund their own massive exclusives. And so the way to combat that for these smaller companies is to target a niche that big companies don't want to do, right? So you've got Big Screen doing this with a PC only headset to be as compact as possible. HTC could potentially consider trying to do another PC only headset that targets the kind of things that consumers want. They could do a wider field of view headset. It's just like trying to do this direct Quest Pro competitor. On paper, the advantage of this thing is that it's more compact, right? But the problem is the way its head strap is done and the facial interface, it isn't even more comfortable. Now, what they have done, to be fair, in the past few months, and we've reported on this many times, is that they now include these four free accessories with it, and you get this upgraded facial interface, a front to back side strap. I do plan on trying this at some point to see if it changes anything, but even then, like, the lenses this thing uses aren't great, right? They're these like first generation pancake lenses that came out like a year before even Pico 4, and they're the little kind of small circular ones that give you like a relatively low field of view. They don't give you that advantage of the dual element pancakes you see in Quest 3 and Quest Pro and Pico 4. It's just, I'm interested to see what HTC announces next. We know that they've been teasing a new headset. We talked about it last week. I wonder if it supersedes this or if they're going to try to keep this thing around. But the one thing I should say in any discussion about HTC, as I always do point out, is that they do continue to be successful in the enterprise space. Right now, we've been fully talking about their failure in the consumer space. HTC has been irrelevant in the consumer space for years now, but in the enterprise space, they continue to have a thriving business.
Yeah, so this comment, Quest Pro has the old chip, and that's a really tough sell. Absolutely. I'm not defending Quest Pro. Like, it's because it holds that old chip, it's a non-starter on so many fronts for so many use cases. And it's still an interesting dev kit for a very, very slim number of people out there that want to test this whole package on Meta with those added APIs of some basic face and eye tracking. But that's not a consumer product by any means. What we have to talk about is the space between $200 and $500 for a new VR headset with controllers. Meta has set its package at $500 for the Quest 3, and it is an amazing package. You've got to like you can compete with Meta and still admit that this is an incredible package, an incredible amount of computer that you get for $500 with hand controllers to interact with some of the best content out there. And then you can connect it to a PC and do all those additional things. And the only way to compete is price or do a better package. And that's what we have to see out of Vive if they ever want to come back and compete in consumers again. And I would argue they're barely even competing anymore in business spaces because of this differential and how the package is just getting better and better on the Meta side of things. So I want to think about and question, can anyone get to a $200, I'll call it an Android XR headset that's hand controllers optional, or track controllers optional, but really uses your gamepad for all of those APKs, and it uses your keyboard really smartly, lets you see the track keyboard all the time. If you get me those two things at $200, you've got an incredible package. You'd have to take a loss on hardware.
Why isn't that Quest 2? You can get a Quest 2 for $200. You can connect a gamepad. You can play Xbox Cloud Gaming. You can use Steam Link. You can do all those things on a Quest 2. The problem is HTC is not in the financial position to sell subsidized hardware like that. They've never, ever competed on price except for at the very end of a headset's lifetime. They don't have that ability. And also, in many cases, if they are selling like a PC hardware, for example, they have to make a hardware profit because Valve is the one that makes the money there. Even on standalone, they don't have enough content to kind of drive enough sales. It's a disappointing situation, but I do think they continue to compete in enterprise. And it's not just a hardware thing, right? A company looks at the whole package of how much support they're going to get, the existing relationships they've had, the fact that these products, in many ways, a lot of their aspects are designed around businesses. Like specifically their other standalone headset, the Focus 3, for example, has those swappable batteries. So you don't have to, if when a headset's finished, you don't have to charge it all the way up again. You just swap in the battery and keep going. They had like these special trackers. They have like multi-battery chargers. They've been working with businesses for years and years. Meta only just launched its Quest for Enterprise program, I think in the past 9 months or so, maybe the past 12 months. It's hard to keep track of time these days, but like Meta has only just started. This is actually their third program, right? They had a Oculus for Business, then they had like an Oculus Quest for Business, and then they canceled both of those programs and moved on to now Meta Quest for Business. Businesses don't like to see that level of like spottiness and patchiness and unreliability and having to switch to a total new offering. HTC's been giving them, for businesses, HTC is the good old reliable. They're not going to get the best and shiniest, but they're going to get something that works and that integrates well with their business. Pico is clearly trying to go after that with Pico for Enterprise. Meta will build up its business offering over time, but we have seen that these Silicon Valley companies aren't always the best at dealing with small to medium enterprises, which is where HTC is thriving right now.
People have moved to comments discussing Quest 4 and how that could fit into the lineup. They're obsessed and really thinking through what Meta is going to do here. I think what I'm agreeing with our commenters here, this community that's kind of pointing out that Meta has multiple levers to pull in competition with anyone that wants to come close to this thing that they're building. And I've done this math of, you take $10 a month and you multiply that out over 24 months and you arrive at a couple $100 in the range of financing a VR headset as just a $10 monthly payment. You can step up from there to 15, 20, 25, 30, and imagine a whole package of services and content that could be just bundled in on top of this base VR headset that it can be controllers or controllerless. We don't know. Meta would be stupid to unbundle the controllers, before they start pulling some of these other levers like buyback programs or like monthly payments. We already see it with Quest Plus, the subscription service, adding enormous value to anyone that goes and signs up for that. You get, I believe, discounted games are going to now be accessible with that subscription. It's again just the beginning of things that they can start bundling in with those purchase prices.
Sure, and that's true, but I should point out that HTC was the first VR company to do both, right? HTC with the original Vive and with some of their follow-up headsets, they were offering the headset for a monthly subscription. Viveport Infinity was the first VR platform to do a subscription for access to a bunch of games. I think they even came before a lot of the modern traditional consoles, right? Viveport Infinity was really pushing that business model in front. It's just if you're a company like HTC, that's none of those things are going to move the needle for you. And you do have this massive competition from a company that is, you know, an order of magnitude bigger in terms of the cash they can bring towards this. And like HTC has just been trying to thrive in the niches that Meta doesn't want to serve. And with enterprise, there are ones. In consumer, they haven't found that space yet. They haven't. Some other companies have. They just haven't. And yeah, we'll have to see how, you know, does Meta's quest for enterprise business eventually eat HTCs even over time, or Picos, or maybe both of them come in and eat HTC, or maybe HTC continues to deliver these kind of interesting features that businesses want. Because, you know, that swappable battery thing is not nothing. That's massive. That's the difference between you use the headset for 2 hours and then you leave it to charge for 2 hours versus you can keep using the headset all day long. That's a big difference. And hardware designed around enterprise use cases, it's just about carving out that niche, and HTC is clinging on to that niche for dear life.
So I'm looking at these comments on the naming scheme or the expectations on the product line over the next year. I think from Mestora's Mars, I want to talk about that because I think what we're looking at as a 3S is our expectation. Meta can always surprise us. We could be wrong, and the indications on reporting are pointing in the wrong direction. We'll wait to see what Meta actually announces, but indications are pointing to a 3S that's at the lower end, underneath the 3. So a low end price for the Meta package that has older lens technology, but modern displays and great games with great processors.
No, it would be the same display as Quest 2 as well. It'd be Quest 2's display and optics with Quest 3's chip and pass-through.
So yes, you get a lot out of that, right? That combination would give you an incredible amount of content to access. So thank you for the correction there, David. So imagine that as this price at the low end, a 3S and a 3. And then you could have a 4 come in above the 3. But you could also, over the course of what Meta does, is really try to move units, lots of units during Black Friday in the Christmas time period. If these things don't sell out on their own, which they might, they have done this in the past. They've been supply constrained in the past. But even without that, they could still try to bundle these services I'm talking about with some of these great games you want to see on the platform to help move Quest 3 and 3S in large numbers this year. And the strength of selling all of that will inform exactly what price they start shipping the 4 at in the very near future. And Quest Pro is, to our eyes, probably an end-of-life developer kit for the future. Like, they got to come back at face and eye tracking again when it really matters. And there's always a possibility that David is using APIs and technology in the studio to animate my mouth movements right now using sound alone. You as a viewer could be tricked into thinking this is real face and eye tracking. If you take this a few years into the future, you could have cheaper sensors that do face and eye tracking at a higher fidelity, filled in by better processes that you're already witnessing today on our show. So you're talking, I don't know if it's 4S, or the Quest Pro 2, whether it ever comes back, but Meta is going to be working on these technologies, whether or not they've got the hardware. Like, that, it's still all on the planning document. Like, they're still going to get there.
Yeah, it's a very interesting sweet spot to have just eye tracking, but not face tracking, and do like we're doing in the studio right now, uh, fake face tracking based on the microphone audio. But I do think you need real eye tracking in with that, and you can actually inform some of the face tracking with the eye tracking. For example, when you laugh, there's a certain way that your eyes will move that they can use to drive that, and machine learning models will be able to use that. So yeah, I think we'll see a more discussion of Quest 4 for another day, though. We probably should move on to talk about
Yeah.
Varjo XR4, unless you have any other comments you want to bring up.
Nope, that's it. I appreciate you moving us on. I blame our audience for focusing us on that for the last little bit. I think they really want us to discuss what's planned for Quest 4. It's kind of like the obvious elephant in the room anytime a competitor is coming up to try to compete. So we
Yep.
will return to it as soon as we can.
Unfortunately, we don't know anything about it, right? All we know is that there's going to be two models, presumably a 4 and 4S, that it will probably arrive in 2026. And we know the code names, but that doesn't really tell you anything. They're just place names in California. So if there are any leaks or indications of the specs or details or price position of Quest 4, we will bring them to you and discuss them. But for now, it's quite far away, right? We're talking like a good 2 years away. This is going to be the era of Quest 3 and Quest 3S for quite a long time, a good 2 years.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised by next year change of plans, but we'll see. We'll have to bring you the latest as soon as we hear it. But like Meta does change its plans all the time, and I guess the Ready at Dawn news that we will discuss with Dawn on the Gamescast will cover some of that changing landscape and how it affects devs and the whole landscape. But yeah, let's definitely move on to the Varjo XR4. I think people are really excited to hear your raw impressions here. You've done the write up explaining what's out there. I would expect you to recap that, but also to get into it with our questions that people want to have about this headset. I did try out a Vario as well, but I'm deferring to David on this because I really wanted to see him and his expert analysis. He's been watching more of the Vario headsets over time. My last Vario headset was very, very early on, but you have seen the whole progression on this line from headset to headset to see that this new one has a lot of promises, but you are kind of pressuring them on whether they actually deliver on those promises. David, why don't you break it down?
Yeah, so it's definitely a mixed bag. So they promised with this headset, Vario XR4, virtual and mixed reality, practically indistinguishable from natural sight. And I'll just very quickly summarize by saying with on the VR front for virtual environments and virtual objects, they close to deliver, right? This thing brings a angular resolution of 51 pixels per degree in the center, which is close to the generally accepted 60 ppd that the human eye can discern. And like for reference here, Quest 3 is 25 pixels per degree. Apple Vision Pro is in like the high 30s, so like 35 or so pixels per degree, maybe 40 or so pixels per degree in some situations. And then something like a Big Screen Beyond's in like the low 30s. So we're talking something that is, from a angular resolution perspective for the actual virtual objects you see, beyond any other shipping headset, and very close to what you get in human vision. The only headset I've ever tried that has a better looking VR view than this VR image is Meta's Butterscotch prototype that I tried. But Butterscotch had a field of view half of this thing, and crucially, it was not a product, it was just a prototype. So like I was pretty blown away by when I tried virtual reality on this thing. Like not only was the resolution great, but also in the same way that I was impressed by the brightness of Somnium VR1, I was impressed by the brightness of this thing. It's 210 nits to the eye, which doesn't sound huge, but remember that like Apple Vision Pro and Quest 3, because of those pancake lenses, are only delivering like 100 nits or so to your eye. And you may think, only twice as bright, but remember that humans perceive brightness logarithmically. So it actually feels like 4 times or, a lot more times more bright. You're actually like, when you go back to a headset that can deliver hundreds of nits compared to the pancake headsets that are only around 100, it really does blow you away, especially compared with this resolution and the fact that this thing has local dimming. So like this has a better VR image quality than even Apple Vision Pro overall. Vision Pro is going to beat it a little bit in contrast and color, sure, but not significantly so that it outweighs the outright resolution. Now, what wasn't impressive though was the other side, mixed reality, the pass-through. The pass-through here just frankly was not impressive to me. It didn't seem any better than Vision Pro, and in some ways it was worse. In some ways it was even worse than something like Quest 3. From a scale and depth perspective, it was completely wrong. So, you get that kind of fisheye distortion. The moving around your head just doesn't feel right in the same way that it would on a Quest 3, even on a Vision Pro, which I've criticized itself for being slightly worse. And from a graininess and detail perspective, it just didn't feel better than like an Apple Vision Pro. And remember, the base model of this thing is $4,000. And this one, which has autofocus cameras, is $10,000. This is a $10,000 headset. And the idea here is that it has 20 megapixel pass-through cameras, and it uses the eye tracking to autofocus the cameras on what you're looking at in the real world. So the autofocus adjusts to that object. And on paper, great, 20 megapixels. That's like more than double Vision Pro. Autofocus, Vision Pro doesn't have that. In practice, meh. It was, yeah, when you looked at something close up and autofocus in that small area, the detail was great, but it wasn't dramatically better. And the issue here is bandwidth. The issue here is the fact that they're having to send all of this camera data over a cable to a PC where it's then processed on the PC. And that's actually the limiting factor for pretty much all pass-through right now. Like on Vision Pro, Apple has 6.5 megapixel cameras. It's not that they chose that because it would be too expensive to put in 12 or 20 megapixel cameras. That's not the reason at all. It's because the R1 chip they have, which is already a breathtaking piece of hardware, is already doing higher memory bandwidth than almost any other mobile chip. That's just where it maxes out. It's all of this sensor data has to be processed somehow, and whether you're transmitting it over a USB cable to a PC or doing it directly on a standalone headset, that's the limiting factor today. And the other one, and I'll just finish by saying this, is sensor size. Everyone looks at resolution on cameras as if it's all that matters. And there was a while in like digital cameras and even in smartphone cameras when companies would try and trick you by saying, we've got more megapixels than the iPhone, we've got more megapixels than your other thing. But what really arguably matters more is the aperture and sensor size. And if you look at this thing, it's the same kind of small aperture, small sensor size that you get in like Quest 3 or Vision Pro. And what you really want to bring in a lot of light and get rid of that graininess is big sensors. I want to see a big giant circle here, bringing in a bunch of light on a $10,000 headset, not these little tiny smartphone sensors.
Yeah, so I'm loving the comments, really teasing apart the issues here, the cost. A lot of people turned off their brains the moment you threw out the price tag of $10,000. A $10,000 headset is out of the price range of the average reader that it's hysterical. This person, Afro, saying it makes Apple Vision Pro sound like a bargain, which is hysterical to think of. This is a wired experience to the PC, and then when I tried it, the notable thing to me is that this eye box that they've constructed, when you put it on your head, it's very clearly built to accommodate glasses. So if you've got a executive room, conference room full of 10 different executives who are all between the ages of 40 and 80, they can all be wearing their glasses and then put on the headset one after another and see what a design model for a new headquarters, a new car, a new building, something that is going to cost millions of dollars to build. This $10,000 headset could hypothetically show it to a room full of people that need to see what it looks like as close as they can. So that's the best case scenario, that this is actually the product for a certain market that fits that scenario, while our comments are all poking fun at the reality of the situation price-wise.
So 86, the Mad Hatter, says, I want to know what the guy in the picture is spreading with his hands. So this is me in the picture. This is me in real life using this headset at a Varjo demo event. And what I'm actually doing there is just testing the occlusion. We've talked a lot about occlusion on this show. This headset does occlusion directly with its LiDAR. So it's doing a direct depth sampling from the LiDAR sensor and just using that raw for occlusion. And so what you get there is dynamic occlusion that is slightly more precise than Quest 3. It's not as like blocky as Quest 3. It's still blocky though, but not as much as Quest 3. But the one really funny thing about this, which I find, is that it doesn't work for black objects. So if I were to hold up a black object, it would not be occluded. And why is that? Because it just completely absorbs the near infrared light, right? That's what black is. The color black, it's complete absorption of the light. So very funny, I find that, my hands were occluded. I could put random objects and they would be occluded. But I lifted my leg up at one point and I was wearing black trousers and I noticed that the virtual objects were not being occluded. And it perplexed me. And also I was wearing, as you can see in this image, this black Fitbit on my wrist. And so there was a hole in my wrist when I was seeing this in virtual reality, right? Where I had my arm except for my wrist, because again, that LiDAR light is just getting completely absorbed by the black object. So it's a funny consequence of using a LiDAR directly for occlusion.
Yeah, I am not thankful to our comment for the images you've put in my head of what David is doing, if not in a business-oriented, industrial grade software experience. Let's talk about training and simulation. Are we ready to get to that section yet, David? Or is there something you want to discuss here first?
I think just one last thing I want to say is the interesting ergonomics here. I'll see if I can find a slightly different image of this headset that makes it a bit more clear. So this thing is one of the heaviest VR headsets that exist. It's actually over a kilogram, which is insane when you think of what we're talking about, other headsets being heavy. But it didn't feel uncomfortable because it has this really interesting hybrid halo strap that has most of the weight on your forehead, but then it also has like a thick top padding and a thick rear padding. So this is like taking the concept of a halo strap and going to the extremes. Now, what this means that if you're sitting stationary or standing stationary, this thing, despite being a kilogram, is comfortable. Now, the massive disadvantage is that you completely kill stability, right? The classic ski goggle style for a headset may not be as comfortable with heavy weights, but it means that the headset stays very still on your face so that when you shake your head, the headset is staying attached. With this thing, if I were to even slightly move my head, the headset would actually itself move slightly independently. It never felt like it was really fully on my head. But as you say, for the use case we're talking about here, which is most of the use case of this thing is seated simulation, right? It's what we're going to talk about soon, actually, where someone is sitting down at a flight simulator, for example, or visualizing some piece of 3D information or 3D CAD models or whatever, or as you say, passing from executive to executive. So that doesn't usually matter. The last thing I would say about Varjo is what I think they should do with this thing. So they plan to sell this thing to wealthy consumers later this year. They said that at the start when they announced Varjo XR-4. But what I think they should do actually is sell a Varjo VR4. Take away the front sensors. Forget about that. Just sell this to enthusiasts who want a near retinal resolution headset, which is what this is. It's a near retinal resolution VR headset. And forget about the pass-through. The pass-through is not impressive. PC users don't really care about it anyway. You could have this thing for people who have beasts of a PC, absolute monster PC, with people that are just have enough money to throw at this that they have like a $5,000 or $10,000 PC. They get maybe you could sell this thing for $2,500 without the sensors, maybe $3,000, and then they can have literally near retinal resolution flight and racing simulator in their home.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it here because our audience has a theme to their comments. They just echoed what you've just said. They were waiting for it. There are people who read David's article where he outlined this idea of a VR4, a headset that has this resolution in VR without this resolution, without this pass through that is unnecessary to a lot of situations. And think that they showed these reconstructed scenes inside my demo of their technology, and it was interesting, but it's abstract. The use case that is on the ground that I think will matter to our audience and bring this home is, would you prefer to have a downloaded 3D model of your joystick, your wheel, whatever you're using physically to interact with your environment, that's textured and lit by your VR headset? or would you prefer to have a grainy pass-through view of the physical item as it's doing all of its turning in real time? Now, imagine that there's no latency difference. Imagine that it's so minuscule, it's imperceptible, the difference in latency between what you see on the pass-through camera and what you see out of the 3D model that is synced up to the location of your object in the real world. I'm going to think that in most cases, you're going to prefer the 3D retextured physical steering wheel that is synced up to the location of everything else in your room. Like I think it is for our audience, the consistent thing that I'm seeing is they don't care about the pass through, and this would get them what they would get at a pass through without the drawbacks.
Sure, with current headsets pass through, yeah. But what really changed my mind on this personally was the pushback I have is it doesn't have to be grainy, because Somnium VR1's pass through, to be clear, is better than this. Somnium VR1, which is like $2,500 for the version that has pass through cameras, it didn't seem grainy, even in bad lighting. It was really great. It wasn't depth and perspective correct, but that didn't hugely matter in this specific context I was using it in. And here's why I think that is, in terms of the actual why isn't Somnium VR1 grainy, and why is this? Again, remember what I was saying about sensor size. Look at these sensors and look at the sensors on your Quest 3. Now look at this. This is Somnium VR1's. Look at these big puppies right here. Look at the size of those. Those are bringing in a lot more light. And that's really it. They need big sensors and big apertures. Bring in more light. You're not building a smartphone. You don't need to have these tiny little smartphone cameras. You have a VR headset. Look at the size of a human eye. It's pretty big. It can bring in a lot of light. You should be aiming to have these pass-through cameras be at least as big as a human eye, ideally. And hopefully that's what we see going forward.
Notes to future concept artists that your VR headsets need to have big, beautiful eyes to look real. I'm loving the comments, letting the light in, those wide apertures mattering. I'm never going to unsee it now that David has pointed out to me that you need wider apertures for more light in VR. That's, I went through photography class back in college, but I've never actually looked at the displays. I like the images, as you pointed out, and I like we're going to see the the emojis demonstrating what you're talking about, David. Are we ready to move on to the next subject yet?
Yeah, I think we can move on. The last thing I'm saying is, they should look like, you should almost think, do you have googly eyes in the front of your headset? That's what your pass-through camera should be. They should be so big, you think they're just like stickers that have eyes on the front. But yeah, hopefully we see that happen in future pass-through headsets. There is no reason for these things to be using smartphone sensors, because these things are not 7 millimeters. They don't need to be that small.
Well, the flip of that, of course, is what do sensors look like that are lower cost, that don't do everything a camera does, that don't, like you talked about the autofocus in this being so overkill that it's actually detracting from the experience.
I would just say it's not the limiting factor. It's not solving for the limiting factor.
Yeah,
so not the fact that it's $6,000 more expensive.
Well, so if you go back into it, I've been trying to break this down, but lighthouse sensors and the way the lighthouse sensors on the headset differ from a camera sensor is actually meaningful at a component level, right? Like, and when you're trying to make hundreds of millions of devices that work in all sorts of different scenarios, right? Those lasers work in darkness. But you have to bring that back in some other way using cameras that are trying to see lights in darkness. Like this matters, right? At the fundamental physics level, who wins long term in putting headsets on millions and millions of people. And it's funny to think about. We're talking about recreating human vision, but the best parts of our show, the fun things that excite us, is what happens when we can see our Wi-Fi signal inside a VR headset, right? And we can see that overlaid with the geometry of our room. We won't want to go back. The moment you experience the improvements that those give us, it's gonna be hard to imagine life without headsets that visualize those things for us in such fidelity.
Yeah, and it's going to be important because for the foreseeable future, you're going to have this experience in headsets where the virtual looks significantly better than the real. On Quest 3, on Apple Vision Pro, on Varjo, even on Somnium, it's just jarring, right? Like you go in to this grainy pass through, and then you see these really sharp and clear virtual objects appear over them, and it kind of doesn't make mixed reality look as real as it could be. You could argue that mixed reality might even look more real if you applied an intentional grain to virtual objects and maybe even rendered them at slightly lower resolution without introducing aliasing. That would actually make them look a bit more real because it would match the pass-through cameras. But yeah, this actually kind of does tie into our next subject, because we'll talk about how this company actually does do everything virtual and doesn't use pass-through in this specific simulator, simply because regulators were not convinced that pass-through is good enough yet. So they've had to devise a fully virtual solution here. And I'm trying hard to find it. Here it is. Yes. So the news here is that a flight simulator rig that uses a VR headset has been FAA qualified for the first time. Now, VR flight simulators have been around for a very, very, very long time. But what makes this one special is that because it has this FAA qualification, it can be used for official pilot flight training hours. So like pilots in the US, just like many other countries, are required to do a certain number of training hours, which can be done in certified simulators or in real aircraft every year. Also, there are certain types of pilot licenses where you need a certain amount of these hours. This thing, for the first time for VR, can be used for that. And so this is a really big moment, right? This thing is cheaper and better from the perspective of the people that are using it than traditional simulators, and a lot cheaper than actually really flying, because all of these traditional aircraft that use fuel, whether it be helicopters or planes, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars an hour of fuel compared to this thing, which is, just using the cost of electricity. And to be clear, this is a simulator for the Airbus helicopters H125, also known as the Eurocopter AS350 Squirrel. So right now there's only for one specific type of helicopter, but this company, Loft Dynamics, they want to expand to a lot of other markets in future. And one thing they're really focusing on is this new emerging type of aircraft, these electric flying Ubers, essentially, these flying taxi bus things that are starting to emerge from a bunch of different companies that we may start see arriving in cities. And if you're not familiar with this, the pitch is that you, instead of getting like a train or a bus from the airport to the center of a city, you would hop into one of these electric flying taxi things and go straight into the city.
So 86, them asking, are their hands tracked in VR so they can see what buttons they press? Can you walk us through that really clearly?
Yeah. So as we were just saying, that they ran into the problem here where when they first were building this, they actually wanted to use mixed reality. They wanted to use pass-through to show the cockpit and then everything else virtual. And that's what I tried back at Somnium, which is a great experience. But the problem is that actually does not provide enough clarity for this to be certified by regulators. They were saying in a Q&A session that the regulators said, look, the perspective and scale isn't correct here, nor is the clarity of these pass-through cameras good enough. This cannot be officially qualified. So they went back to the drawing board and said, what we're going to do is do this fully virtual, because they're using a Varjo VR3, which has in the center retinal resolution. So you look at a cockpit and you have the same angular resolution as your eye in real life. But obviously then they have to bring in your body virtually. So they developed their own tracking system that uses these cameras above the headset here to track the entire pilot's hand and body in combination with these tracker codes that are pasted all over this virtual cockpit. So they have all the same controls as the real helicopter. They track the position of the pilot's hands and arms and fingers, and then they bring in a fully virtual version. So it's actually just what you were talking about, Ian, this idea that you can actually do better virtual than mixed reality today. And that's so much so that regulators are even saying it.
Yeah, that's fascinating to imagine. And there's a lot of places we can go with this conversation. I'm curious to see what our commenters have. I see some funny jokes out there that I probably won't say out loud, but they're over on the Gamescast. We discussed Bomber Drone, and we briefly mentioned that there was an overlap between games and flight because we had 3 articles in quick succession on our site. We had this one on the FAA. We also had the US-made Skydio drone piloted from a Quest 3. And I've seen comments from people saying they tried to do the same thing with the Skydio drone app with the DJI app, and it didn't work, connecting it and side loading it. I thought that was interesting. And there are significant safety concerns when it comes to side loading an app to remote control another device. And we'll be watching that and paying attention to what happens here. But there's a theme with this story and the next story that we've got, that basically any use case where an operator can practice or remote control, it's going to be useful to consider a general purpose VR headset for that use case. And it's it's past time that we enunciate that to our audience, right? I think it's been true for a while here that general purpose VR headsets like Quests are incredibly useful for remote control and for training, except we don't talk about that a lot because it's not the consumer use cases that are so common right now.
Yeah, and when it comes to remoting in, so James O'Loughlin points out here that there's a shortage of airplane pilots, and that's because the training requirements are high and there's not enough people able to meet them. And that's one of the things that this company, Loft Dynamics, are really pushing on. And you had, I think, like the former FAA administrator coming out and saying that this is something that's going to be crucial to fixing that pilot training shortcoming. Because one of the things you can actually do here is this person here is sitting in one seat of the helicopter, but in the seat beside them, they can have an instructor who is at Loft Dynamics headquarters on the other side of the country appear virtually beside them. And so they can, without having to send a person all over the place or have local trainers, conduct person-to-person co-op training in VR while having these rigs distributed remotely throughout the country. So this is something you just cannot do with a traditional flight simulator, right? You have to have the person there with you. You could have maybe an audio version of them, but that's completely different to them being able to, you will see, just like you would in VR chat with body tracking, the other person's hand and arm saying, look, it's actually that control there, and watch your altitude. Let me just take that over for you a little second. It's like this, come through this tree like this, fly over this. All of these hands-on things. This is just the beginning, and it's very clear that there are so many situations in which virtual reality is far, far superior to traditional methods for training and simulation.
Yeah, and I saw, because we've done these articles on drones, I've gotten recommended the drone subreddit, and seeing all these things that are being done all the time. There was one, like when you watch first person video out of a drone or even a race car on the ground. If anyone has gotten the Mario Kart live home circuit game, those drones move really slowly, but because the wide field of view of the camera is there, it feels like they're racing across the floor. You apply that same principle to drone footage, and it feels like these things are flying super duper fast, and they can fly super duper fast. It's the televised racing is a growing sport in drone footage, but all the headsets that are used for those drone races are purpose built with antennas to handle long distance, high speed feedback between the drone and the headset. Well, what we've discussed and what we're seeing here is that if you have a drone that is sending back a 3D map of your environment, if it's taking the same active geometry based view of the world that your headset does, Don Hopper found this in the Bomber drone game. The simulated view that he sees out of a fake a drone that only exists in virtual reality is the same map that can be beamed back by some of the most advanced drones out there. And what that provides is a comfortable way to view a lot of this stuff. So you can imagine in the very near future having a map laid out right in front of you and watching 10 or 15 drones all racing or competing or battling, doing whatever, all being remote commanded by people in VR headsets. The reason we don't have that right now is quality concerns, cost concerns. It's not comfortable to do, but all this latest advancements are going to close the gap and make it more useful for a lot more people.
Yeah, I mean that kind of 3D battle space management you're talking about is something that we've seen Anduril do in Palmer Lucky's defense company. That's one of the things that they are looking at to integrate their kind of Lattice software's view of the entire battlefield into a virtual or mixed reality view. The commanders can walk around and see all of these assets at once. And as you say, it also opens up new ways of flying these things, right? You can imagine, for example, we were just talking about those electric air taxis. Maybe some of them will be autonomous, but if it runs into an issue, someone can remotely fly it using VR to see the scene in front of them as a 3D volume, and then also have a live view of a first person camera through the nose of the aircraft. There's a lot of potential applications here as these VR headsets start to mature in this space.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of interesting comments here, and people recognizing sort of the value of simulation, right? I think if anyone has ever raced against their ghost selves in any racing game over the past 30 years, you know that feeling of trimming a few seconds off of your time racing around a course, right? The same thing is done and made possible by those 3D maps provided of everything around us. We're moving here towards the end of our show, but we've got this firefighters story that we should mention briefly, because the firefighters training in VR, I saw this years ago, but it's been building and been improved since then. But imagine firefighting and training for fighting a fire with a vest that actually heats up as you fight the fire. So you could have uh, basically a very visceral simulation that is not it's gonna take a whole nother layer to your experience that you wouldn't have any other way.
Yeah, we talk about this other use case of VR for training and simulation, just as Clay7 or CJ7, sorry, in our comments says, at my company, they train all forklift, cherry pickers, etc., with a VR setup before they ever get to use on live. This is a space that's been exploding for years now, and it's just accelerating even more. The growth of VR in this space, training and simulation, is just not being seen by the public. And some of that's our own feeling for not exposing it more, and some of it's just that these companies are doing these things behind the scenes and not in public view. But this example here we're talking about, with this image here being our own Henry Stockdale on the scene trying out, it's an example of another situation where it's not just cost that VR can save on, but safety. So if you are training to do a job that puts you in harm's way, before you go into the physical world and put someone who has never tried this situation before into something that could actually hurt them, you can put them into a virtual version of that situation and have them get really, really experienced with the right operating procedure, what to do. And then by the time they do get into the real world, they're pretty confident in what they're about to do. And that's this example here of Henry at the UK Fire Service College is just another great example of that. And we've seen also, for example, that some police services do taser training with these virtual haptic suits where they're taking on these really high risk, dangerous situations, and they get used to the feeling of being punched or tased before they ever have to go into the physical world. And it's just, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it just is another example of VR is safer, cheaper, and better than all of the traditional training methods that have come before.
Yeah, I'm appreciating the comments from people who real life seeing the impact of this already, right? And this has been, to David's point, right, a very long time. Everything we're talking about here is not really a surprise to the people who actually use this technology, who are in our audience, have used this technology for years. I think what we're speaking to is we're trying to bring that knowledge that is there, that this is happening and is such a time saver, money saver. We're just letting more people know about it. And I love the examples. Email tips@uploadvr.com if you have any really interesting training uses of VR, simulation saving time and money like we've talked about. I'd love to see some of those sample examples that this is across the board being used everywhere, and most people just are trying to catch up to the idea that this is happening.
Yeah, you can also use our contact page if you go to uploadvr.com and scroll down to contact us. Please let us know about these things. As Ian said, it's not new, but what we do see over time is that these headsets get better, and with the rise of standalone headsets, meaning that this can be done wirelessly without as much PC infrastructure, it's just getting more and more widespread. We saw when Oculus Go first came out, for example, there was, I think it was Walmart, I don't fully recall, buy like thousands and thousands of these things through, or a contractor of Walmart buy thousands of these things and do certain types of training. And obviously that was without positional tracking controllers. Now these days you're getting headsets that can do more and more realistic graphics, completely standalone, and inside out tracking that works even in these very busy environments. Mixed reality too, right? That is another frontier that we very much so plan to report on soon. How this kind of training and simulation is starting to enter the mixed reality space, where you can combine real world tools and equipment with virtual outcomes and virtual scenarios that are added onto it. That's a completely new area that companies are only just starting to explore with Apple Vision Pro and Quest 3. So that's going to be an entirely new area of training and exploration we're seeing.
I'm gonna I think it's time for us to move off this subject and get into our big subject here, PlayStation VR2. I guess I'll leave on this note that we joked on the VR Games cast, and I guess I'll just mention it now, that at the same time that, like, I keep thinking about this idea of war games. There's the 1980s movie. It was immortalized in, I think, Ready Player One, the book. This movie, War Games. The only winning move is not to play. Right. This 40-year now sphere of using simulation to plan out actions before you do them. It's funny to imagine. It's not funny to imagine. It's scary. It's intimidating to think about how cool a war games type experience would be on a city scale, where you've got paintball on the ground and you've got paintball in the air, and you have to compete in this way, where around any corner you might find a drone and you have to paintball them down. That I can imagine a large segment of our audience that has been raised on various games where we've done that in Call of Duty already, right? Like, would want to play that game or watch that sort of game televised, at the same time that everything else we are talking about here is true, right? Like, it's a very real world. We're talking about jobs that can be made safer by using VR in the mix. One of the safest jobs to do would be to remote kill people. Very, very heavy statement to make, but that is the reality of this technology.
Yeah, there's definitely been this blurring line between like entertainment and warfare in this sense since the 90s, right? It was, some people called the Gulf War the video game war in a sense, because of just how many new technologies were being deployed, where people were using these remote weapons with, TV cameras essentially in the nose to target enemies. And that's something that is just an increased trend over time. We're going to see a lot more of warfare switch from raw hardware to software, where human beings are controlling waves of assets using integrated software that they view in some ways through VR and AR headsets. And it's going to be a continuing trend, right? But that's being a continuing trend in warfare, right? Originally, you killed someone by sticking a sword into them. Then you kill someone from 100 feet away with a musket, and then from a mile away with a sniper. And now, sometimes on the other side of the planet from a drone. This is a continuous process that's been going on for 1,000 years now.
Yeah, if anyone, we are very good at running off on tangents at a moment's notice, but I think it is a testament to the ubiquity of the technology. It touches everything, and it's going to continue to mold reality in this century more and more. And that is the story, the consistent story that we have told on this show, is discovering kind of the ways that this technology is molding daily life. So let's move on to PlayStation VR2 on PC. David got this up and running. I am devastated because my PS5 is living its best life in my kids' bedroom, where they play PS5 all the time, and don't have a PSVR 2 hooked up to it because I sent off the PSVR 2 to Don. And why is that tragic, David? Because I want to plug in the PSVR 2 directly to my 2080 graphics card, the single generation graphics card from NVIDIA that would do this directly, and then open up Steam VR so that I can enjoy an OLED VR game on my PC for the first time in many, many years. And I'm not going to go and spend the hundreds and hundreds of dollars to go and do this. So, David, why don't you walk us through your experience here as I live vicariously through you?
I mean, what you point out is a good thing to start on, right? That yes, this adapter is out, it's $60, but Ian is right to say that if you have a certain specific set of graphics cards, right? If you have one of the RTX 20 series or AMD RX 6000 series that had this USB-C virtual link port, which was only a thing for one generation of each card, you don't even need the adapter. You can literally take the PlayStation VR 2's single USB-C cable, plug it into your GPU, install the PlayStation VR 2 app on Steam, and you're ready to go. For any, oh, we have Ian disconnecting while in the middle of the air there. That was quite strange. But if you are anyone else, if you have a newer card, if you have an older card, or if you had one of those cards that didn't have the port because it was optional for manufacturers for many of the models, you're going to need this thing, the PlayStation VR2 PC adapter. And in fact, if you don't have it as a spare DisplayPort cable lying around, you're going to need one of those too, because we have a question here right now from Phoebe82, which is a great question to start us off with, which is what exactly is this adapter? What exactly does it do? So I can explain that with some images from my review. On one side, it takes in the PlayStation VR 2's single USB-C cable, because that's what PSVR 2 has, just a single USB-C. On the other side, it has a fixed USB cable. That's what this is, that goes straight into your PC, your motherboard, or the front of your case, USB, ideally your motherboard. It has a DC power adapter, and it comes with a power adapter, so you just plug it into a socket. If you don't have a free socket near your PC, this is going to be a little bit annoying, but I assume most people do. And then it has a DisplayPort that goes into your graphics card. Now, it doesn't come with a DisplayPort cable, but it's $10 on Amazon for a cable if you don't have one lying around. The other thing you'll need is Bluetooth, because the controllers themselves on PlayStation 5 connect directly to the console via Bluetooth. On PC, you'll need to make sure that your PC has Bluetooth. Either your motherboard has it built in, or you have a USB Bluetooth adapter. JJ in the comments is saying that they wish that the adapter came with Bluetooth built in. I think that's a really great point. They probably should have included that. Ideally, they should do what a lot of other headsets do and have the controllers to connect to the headset. Sony had this claim in another magazine that they said that PlayStation VR 2 was designed for a PC from the beginning, and that this was all part of an original plan. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, on the record, I do not believe them. I don't believe that. There's no evidence here. Having the controllers direct connect via Bluetooth to the console is a big piece of evidence that wasn't the case. The fact that you need an adapter and that it came out over a year later is a big piece of evidence that wasn't the case. But we'll move on to actually talking about the experience of using this thing on PC. So the really frustrating thing for me is that when you compare this to Quest 3, PlayStation VR 2 has everything that Quest 3 doesn't, but Quest 3 has everything that PlayStation VR 2 doesn't. It's so frustrating that what you get with PSVR 2 is these incredible colors and contrast that make you wonder how you didn't notice how dull the image of LCD headsets are, whether it's your Valve Index, your Reverb G2, your Quest 3. You have these dull LCD colors and you have this really limited contrast because of how LCDs work with their backlight. When you have this PlayStation VR 2, whether you're in Elite Dangerous, whether you're in Air Car, whether you're in Star Wars Squadrons, whether you're in Beat Saber, even with that contrasting dark background and these intense, reds and greens and blues and purples, it's breathtaking. It's really stunning. Seeing PC VR content like this again, since we haven't had OLED headsets around for quite a while, it really brings you back. And it's one of those things where if you haven't experienced OLED before on PC, you're gonna probably be blown away. The problem, of course, is that regular OLED, the type of panel that's used in this headset, has these annoying trade-offs that are really evident in PSVR 2. One of them is that you have this pentile subpixel arrangement where you're only actually having 2 subpixels per pixel, and the subpixels are actually smaller and more spread out than you would see on an LCD panel. Now, normally that would give a screen door effect, and that's what you saw on older headsets like Quest 1 and Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. What Sony has done here, very clearly, by just looking at it, you can see, is added some sort of diffusion layer to kind of soften that out and kind of blur the pixels, subpixels a little bit together. So the result there is you get this kind of soft image. It doesn't really ever seem fully crisp, as if it's ever so slightly out of focus. The other huge problem is this Mura. So if you don't know what that is, it's a fixed pattern noise that's over the entire image, and it's non-uniform. So it's like as if you have like a dirty window or something where you just want to wipe that dirt away, but you can't because it's there, it's inherent, and it's frustrating. So
like a bubble. Is it the light that burnt? Like it feels like a bubble to me sometimes.
A bubble is a weird analogy. I would say it's like it's just an inconsistency, right? It's just like there is, if you were in a completely one color theme, this is where you notice it hugely. If you're in like a loading screen where the app just displays pure white, for example, you're not seeing a pure white image. You're seeing this really noisy image with a bunch of different colors, a bunch of different shades of white in all of these kind of speckled patterns. It's like a speckle almost. And it's just so jarring when you go straight back to back with a Quest 3, because a Quest 3, you get this sharp but dull image because you miss those OLED colors, right? I go into my Quest 3 and I'm like, God, I wish I had PlayStation VR 2's punchy colors and amazing contrast. But when I'm in PlayStation VR 2, I'm like, God, I wish I had Quest 3's sharp and high detail, clean image. It's so frustrating. And the issue for me is also that this kind of negates one of the big advantages, because on paper, PlayStation VR 2 gives you this uncompressed DisplayPort image. You're not doing USB compression. It's just a raw, native, uncompressed, lossless, I should say, image. But I think that the Mura pattern, at least on my headset, and it was the same with the other PlayStation VR 2 I tried before I got my headset, actually is worse than the compression. It's just, I wish I had a headset that had the punchy colors of PSVR 2 and the amazing contrast and the sharpness and clarity of Quest 3. And I do, right? It's actually Apple Vision Pro. I do have a headset that has both. The problem is that it costs $3,500. It's going to...
And uses a hacky method to connect right now, which arguably this is still a bit hacky when you consider the features that are left on the table by the connection, right? Have you covered that yet? That this does not yet add some of the key features of the PlayStation platform to your VR experience.
Yeah, I haven't covered that yet, but we'll move on to that very, very quickly. The last thing I want to say on this whole LCD versus OLED frustration is that commenters are pointing out that there is actually a nice middle ground for now, which is this QD LCD with mini LED, or QLED as some manufacturers call it, which is LCD with lots of little backlights and a quantum dot layer. And the quantum dot layer gives you punchier colors, and the lots of little backlights give you more contrast. So you get this kind of midpoint between LCD and OLED. It's what we saw in Quest Pro. It's also in Varjo XR-4 that I was just talking about. It's in Somnium VR1. It's in Pimax Crystal. For now, the best screen technology that, other than the persistence, overall best, is micro OLED. But it's too expensive. So right now, I do actually think that QLED, as people call it, which is QD LCD, quantum dot LCD, well, it's a quantum dot layer over an LCD with lots of little backlights. Mini LED, whatever you want to call it, QLED, that is the sweet spot, I think. I think that is the best balance between getting a sharp and noise-free image with punchier colors, but still not as punchy as OLED, and better contrast, but still not as good contrast as OLED. But unless we have any other things you want to talk about in the display, let's indeed talk about those missing features. I want to give David a lot of space to get into the nuts and bolts here. I appreciate the comment from Paul
saying that now is my time to do the dance, that I was right all along for, as David puts it, the wrong reasons. But I want to give David a chance to summarize everything for everyone first before we dive into all the tangents that are going to follow in what Sony might do next. So I think this is the right time to discuss what is not coming over this display port. What is not coming over this adapter, David?
Yeah, sorry to keep delaying him, but there's one comment here that I find quite interesting. They say that they imagine the Mura as a dirt on my in-game gas mask or helmet. It doesn't bother me. I also have a Quest. So I just want to finish off this section by saying that how much that Mura bothers you is going to vary from person to person. And even which you prefer do you prefer a sharp but dull image of LCD or a punchy but soft image of OLED? What you prefer there, both of those things are going to be subjective. And it's even possible that there is some variance in Mura between these different units that you get. Both PlayStation VR2s I had looked pretty much the exact same from a Mura perspective, but this thing is going to really depend on what your eyes themselves prefer. A lot of this is going to come down to personal preference. But yeah, let's talk about what's not here. And it's kind of frustrating because if you are buying this thing as a PC VR headset, which some people are going to be with this new adapter, you're going to have dead cost and weight in your headset, because this thing has eye tracking, it has headset rumble, it has precision haptics on the controllers, and none of those things are supported in the adapter on PC. Nor are the resistive triggers of the controllers, right? If you haven't used the PlayStation 5 with its gamepad or the PSVR 2, the controllers actually have software controlled but hardware implemented dynamic resistance, so it can actually be more difficult or less difficult to squeeze the trigger, which is a really interesting haptic effect. None of that is here. You get the display, you get the controllers, you get the tracking, you get basic rumble, but you don't get anything else. You don't get eye tracking. That means no eye tracked avatars in VR chat, no foveated rendering, which is a big important feature for people who use simulators. None of that is there, and yet you're still paying the same price for the headset. So, this is a $600 to $650 headset, depending on what you need, and you're missing that out. And some people could push back and say Quest 3 doesn't have eye tracking, but Quest 3 uses its cost on other things, right? You get mixed reality, you get color pass through. That's not a feature you get on PlayStation VR 2. You get this entire other usage, and obviously it's also a full-fledged standalone computer that you can use other than your PC. Now, the other thing people may point out is that not many Steam VR apps support eye tracking, and none support high dynamic range, and none support these adaptive triggers. But the counter argument there is that they would if there was a headset out there that had it as a hardware feature, right? They don't support it because there's no PC headset that has it. But if you do have this thing starts showing up in the Steam hardware survey, and we'll be watching that really closely. How is this thing on the Steam hardware survey? How many people are actually using this thing? How much of this is just a cool to have idea hype, and how many people are actually going to be using this as a PC headset? We'll keep looking at that. But you say yet. There's been no indication of Sony that this is coming. It won't be available at launch. It isn't available. It was actually isn't, not won't. And we reached out to Sony to ask, is this coming in future? Do you have a reason that it's not there on launch? We have not yet received a response.
So, let's imagine a hypothetical where the head of Sony, whatever, let's say the head of Sony overall is going and meeting with Tim Cook, as well as Mark Zuckerberg, and as well as the head of Google, and they're talking about all the different ways that they can work together. And then they go and meet with Valve, right? They'd have to go meet with Valve too at some point to discuss these things. How do you agree to plan this out? Are you able to work it out so that you have your own platform? Let's say it's PlayStation Online, your PlayStation Plus catalog. Does it work for you to attach your entire VR library to that whole thing and sell a headset? Is that a path, or do you make more money as a supplier of components to other companies? Is there a path to do both, to both offer your own headset and everyone else's? David and I have debated what Sony is going to do here for years. We've been in two camps, and he's pointed out the stupidness of the idea that Sony would be able to make enough money off of doing PSVR2 support on PC, and I haven't necessarily disagreed. What I've pointed out, what we both kind of pointed out, and it's the thing I'm going to harp on now. Meta is shipping headsets today. They're shipping them by the bucket load very soon when they bring back the price that the Quest 2 has been pushing at. And every other company has to catch up to the reality that Meta is and has been 3 or 4 steps ahead of what everyone else in the market has done. The Apple Vision Pro is the first time we've seen an operating system that is trying to answer Meta on some very fundamental questions about what they've chosen to do. I think where David and I have differed has been basically you've been understanding or believing in this platform-based approach while not being able to see how Sony can evolve into this new period where they support some things on PC and some things on PlayStation. I think our audience would Sony has an enormous task in front of it to make clear why you would want to do that. There is very little benefit. I appreciated Don's comment here that why wouldn't you just go get another PC headset? It is on Sony to convince you of why you need to go and get this headset and try to combine these libraries right in front of our eyes. They've done nothing to that. And as David has been so careful to point out, there's the entire PSVR 1 library that is still inaccessible, even on PlayStation VR 2 on PlayStation 5 hardware. And that's an embarrassing, sad oversight. And I think that's where I'm struggling with conveying to our audience, understanding myself. The games that were on PSVR 1, with a few exceptions, are dead games from dead companies. Like those there was no reason to go with Superhot and a couple of the standout examples. There's a bunch of games that the ownership has probably changed hands since the game was developed, and now it's been 8 years or something since those games were made. Getting those games made or updated for modern PSVR 2 hardware, or even to get it running on PC, is kind of an absurd ask. It makes a lot more sense to focus on what's new and coming in the near future.
I don't think it's absurd to have a compatibility layer, right? Like if you're letting people use this thing on PC, where none of the games on PC were designed for this headset, why can't we just run PlayStation VR 1 titles in some sort of compatibility layer where you acknowledge, like, in the same way that I can play PS4 games on my PS5, let people play PSVR 1 games, just even if it's lower quality, even if you have to do it without the features, you're already doing that on PC, right? It's just like you have this fully curated approach on PS5 with these PSVR2 games that are all designed around the PSVR2's feature. And then you have this completely uncurated thing on PC. Give a middle ground. Let people play Skyrim, Minecraft, Star Wars Squadrons, Astrobot, huge titles that support that old headset. Like, it's not even that they can't run on PS5, right? You can use PlayStation VR 1 on PS5. So the console is fully capable of doing it. It's just that you have to actually own the old headset to do it. That to me is just a complete lack of will from Sony. And I'll continue to give my same position that I gave last week when we talked about this, is that I don't think this is part of some grand strategy. I think this is just part of them trying to sell off stock. I think I saw a commenter saying here that this is the white flag to sell off stock. They have this headset. They want to they want to pay off their investment in it. They're not able to sell it to enough PlayStation 5 owners. They try to fire sale for a few weeks, the $350 price. They can't do that forever because that's obviously, I'm assuming that they're maybe making a loss there on that. And now they're saying, here's another strategy. Let people who own a PC buy it, and hopefully this gives a bigger market. I don't think, the reason I say that whole thing for the wrong reasons is I don't think this is a sign of success. This is instead of success. This is, what do we do with this thing now that we can't sell it? I think that the fact that there's none of these flagship features says that. I think that the fact that there is no platform play here says that. There's not PSVR2 games coming to a PlayStation store on PC, right? You can't play Horizon Call of the Mountain on PC with this thing. That's not happening. There's no like trade here. It's not like Half-Life Alyx is coming to PlayStation 5. There's nothing like that. This is just an adapter that takes in USB-C and on the other side takes in DisplayPort power and USB. There's nothing like, and a driver for Steam VR. And I should point out that, you know, one thing I forgot to mention is that I'm seeing a pretty big bug in that driver where when I rotate my head horizontally, I'm seeing this warping distortion that causes vertical lines, for example, to wave. And before people say it, no, it's not reprojection. I've turned off motion smoothing. I've even gone into advanced settings and to disable all forms of reprojection. This is something on the driver level. All I'm seeing here is what I titled my review, a bare minimum port for a unique headset that Sony doesn't care about anymore.
So, yeah, Guy saying that's a lot of time discussing an adapter that probably 1,000 people will end up buying. That's fair, and it's probably true if Sony doesn't, if Sony leaves this to die on the vine from here, if there is no grand strategy. If you're right that they don't even try to, like, even if there wasn't a grand strategy, they could still come back and throw something at offering this to sell more than 1,000. But I think Guy is probably right there that it will be just a handful of people if they don't make clear what the future holds for their platform. Yeah, PSVR ETA, the idea of a standalone headset from Sony. How do we get people excited for that concept from here? There's, it's not impossible to imagine a PS5 that communicates wirelessly with a standalone VR headset like a Sony PSVR standalone headset that has the same processor and overall system that runs everything else. The question then becomes, why not just go and partner with Meta on that? That's what I'm hinting at with these high level discussions. We're in this weird phase that the future of your entire corporation, thousands of people you employ across multiple companies globally, are all going to shift in different directions based on the deal you make with another company to carry their platform. Well, the future, like the reason consoles exist, the beauty of what Nintendo has done is it's driven its own future for the last many decades. Sony goes through ups and downs where one console generation doesn't sell as well as the next console generation, but it still has enough money and smarts to keep those prices through and build the next product. I don't know that Sony and Microsoft are going to be able to do this on their own into the future. I think Meta has built too powerful and big a product with Horizon OS to not eat or partner with both Sony and or like it's absurd for us to imagine right now headsets from Sony and headsets from Microsoft that run Meta's operating system, and it may never come to pass, but you would have to think that they're seriously considering it as well.
So I don't think they do, and I think the reason I don't think they would is for much of the reasons you explained near the end of your viewpoint there, because I'll come back again to this whole thing of a platform play. This is the reason I don't think that Sony would be interested in trying to take on Meta directly with a PlayStation VR portable or whatever you want to call it, because firstly, it dilutes their brand in that PlayStation is all about this premium gaming, and then they would have to provide these standalone graphics that are obviously a lot less than what a PlayStation or PC can put out. Then the other problem is, just like we were talking about with Pico and HTC much earlier in the show, Sony has to then build up their own standalone VR platform and fund all of these games completely separately to PS5, and they have to be ported over. It's the same issue with the idea of Valve doing standalone. A standalone VR is mobile VR. It's a completely different platform to high-end VR. The games, if they wanted to even port the existing PlayStation VR2 games, like their flagship titles like Horizon Call of the Mountain, they have to be actually ported. You would have to build completely different models and textures and assets for the entire game to bring it over. So you'd be running these two completely parallel platforms. And in some way, that's why PlayStation Portable failed, right? We don't have a PSP today. It died out. Part of the reason of that is that Sony wasn't willing to do this two platforms at once play. And I think what we will see is, if we do see a PlayStation VR3, which I think we will for when they come out to the PlayStation 6 eventually, I think they want to still focus around, don't compete with Meta. Do what you did again with PlayStation VR, except with a better strategy. Focus on the fact that you're delivering a higher end, richer graphical experience, because that is the advantage of PlayStation VR2 over Quest today, right? There are going to be some people in the comments saying, I love my PSVR 2 and I don't want a Quest. And I really sympathize with that, because the graphics you get on PlayStation VR 2 blew away what you get on even Quest 3, right? You're in something like Horizon Call of the Mountain or Resident Evil 8 or even Resident Evil 4. You can even do a direct comparison here, right? The Resident Evil 4 remake that you play on PlayStation VR 2 looks 10 years ahead of the Resident Evil 4 port that you have on Quest 3. And I think it's not that Sony's entire concept was wrong here, a high-end VR platform. I just think they had the wrong approach with how to price the headset. As I think Don in our comments here, our own Don Hopper said, what that sale showed that we've been talking about last week, that $350 sale, is that people do have an appetite for this thing when it's priced right. It's just that it was priced too high. They designed a headset that was more expensive than PlayStation VR 1 instead of less expensive. And if they had a PSVR 2S or a PSVR 2 Lite, I think they could revive this thing, right? If I were Sony's PlayStation division guy in charge of VR, I would come out with an LCD PSVR 2 Lite or E or 3 or whatever the hell you want to call it, and put it out there for $250 and watch what happens. I think they would be shocked by what you would see. I think you would see a bunch of people say, I have a PS5. You're telling me for $250 I can get a VR headset and play these cool games? And then you would see a cyclic effect where more people are buying the games. Developers can see that. Developers then take the time to port more content to PS5. They take the time to make their existing PS5 games support VR. It's all about price. We've said it over and over again on this show. Price matters. And that's always been the biggest problem here. It's not that it didn't support PC. It's not that it's not standalone. It's the price.
Oh, there's so many things I want to mention. I want to talk about openness of PC related to this. I think when you talk about price, it's like it's too expensive to not have an open PC. I think it's the way I read this. It's what I think about in our audience. I don't know if I'm probably in a minority here, but I still think it's an amazing thing what you can do these days with classic video games. So you can go and get multiple little USB attachments to plug in to your computer of any kind and get a cartridge of almost any generation, plug it into the reader, and play that game directly on your PC using emulation. You can do that for 30 years of physical media of various cartridge types on modern systems. You cannot do it on a PS4 because of the lockdown console approach. You've had Apple in the last 6 months open up its entire ecosystem to emulators and ROMs to open up this entire venue for content that didn't exist before on its platform. That's non-existent on consoles. It's this entire class of content you can't touch, and you can't do USB devices the same way you can on a standard PC. I don't feel like that consoleized approach survives into the future. I feel like if you're selling a PS5 Pro, you want it to also do all the things your PC can do. I want to get a PC for that price. I don't want to get a console.
You do, but 61 million people have bought the PS5, if I remember the last statistic right. They've sold 60 million of these things and they're keeping selling them. And that's not even what they make the money on. Again, it doesn't matter. They could sell 200 million PS5s. What matters is that people get those PS5s, and the only way they can buy games for PS5 is through the PlayStation Store or through buying a game that Sony has certified, for a physical edition. That's the business model here. I could see them being more open over time. I could see them, having like a more open store. We've seen that happen, right? The PlayStation Store and Xbox Store are more open to indies than ever before, though they're still not indie friendly, according to the developers I've spoken to. But I just have to keep talking about what we were talking about last year. What's the incentive? They are selling tens of millions of these things. The PS5 Pro is going to be a fairly niche product in comparison to get some extra revenue from power users. Just why would they give up the 30% cut on the games?
So on Steam Deck right now, this is going to be a stretch, but I got Google Chrome running on Steam Deck, and then I pulled up Horizon Worlds full screen on Steam Deck, and it's running. It's I even got it running off of the Steam Deck controls, so it was using gamepad controls to run around inside of one of those Horizon Worlds on a Steam Deck using the same avatar I'm using here in the studio. And it was a very hacked together solution. I had to install Chrome from the Linux distribution, then add it to Steam and get it in there. But what that proves, what it shows, is PlayStation Home that Sony had a decade ago on what, 2 generations old console cycles, is essentially what I have on that Steam Deck hardware. It looks to me like the same fundamental platform, but running on a website today. That's the competition that Sony is facing. A platform that runs in VR and out from a website and is embedded into the operating system of its competition. I I don't know how Sony stays up to speed and ever gets people back here.
Well, I mean, Fortnite runs on PlayStation and it runs on all of these other platforms. This is something that's for the content itself, right? Like Sony pushed hard against crossplay for a long time, and recently they've started to embrace it, and that's the trend that we've seen. But I don't see why that needs a platform shift. As long as they have, Xbox has Rec Room on it. I I assume Rec Room could come to PlayStation at some point as well. These are content level things. There's one thing I want to bring up in the comments, which I find quite interesting here from Gigo, and the developer of Virtual Desktop, who said that price matters for everyone except Apple. And I'm not sure if you meant that sarcastically or literally. Obviously, I can't tell that from the comments, but it's a very good point, because a lot of people don't really grasp this, that Apple is pretty much the only company that has convinced a mass market to buy expensive tech products. So, for example, I will always point out the fact that there are vastly more Android phones in the world than there are iPhones. And there are more Android phones sold than iPhones. But if you were to segment that market to only phones that cost as much as the iPhone or more, Apple owns almost the entire market. There might as well not even be a second place. Samsung, for example, you would consider their primary competitor, and that's true, but Samsung makes the majority of its unit sales on low-end phones and mid-range phones, not on their iPhone competitors, if you look at this globally. Same thing with MacBooks, where it's even more extreme, right? If you talk about how many Windows laptops are sold and how many Macs are sold, Windows wins completely. But if you segment it to how many laptops that are the same price or more than MacBooks, Apple owns the entire market. This is a phenomenon that is very complex to explain. It's down to branding. It's Apple is a cultural phenomenon, and some people have called it more of a luxury goods company than a tech company at this point. And I'm not saying it's not a tech company, but it's that they have built a branding and marketing and ecosystem machine that no other company on the planet has approached yet. And so, yes, it is actually true to say that price matters for every company other than Apple.
I I, I agree with that, and it's also one of the things we've got to watch, because it represents the biggest indication of vision. To take a look at your existing profit centers and say, actually, I think this next platform we're going to get our profit center from somewhere else. We're gonna plan on doing like pricing that in up front, right? Fitness and gaming are two areas that Apple has turned major subscriptions over the last few years. Apple Arcade is a major subscription effort on their side, and then they've got, of course, fitness as well. Imagine a VR headset from Apple that's priced as a home gym. It seems like I have to point out Supernatural in this acquisition from Meta to buy a Supernatural fitness service. It's when I made a list when we were talking about Ready at Dawn, and we'll get into that on Tuesday. I listed off all these different companies that Meta has acquired over the years. There's one that stands out as different from a content perspective from all the others, and that's within and Supernatural with this fitness service. And we have yet to see. It's that acquisition was opposed by the U.S. federal government. So how could Meta ever plan to build a product that was built around a service that hadn't been properly acquired yet? My point being that now that it is a proper part of Meta, we could see next year and in the years ahead an actual headset built for fitness purposes by Meta. If Apple wasn't there to answer that, it would be a huge failure of vision. And again, you can start packaging in services with this.
You're close there. Mark Zuckerberg did say with the Horizon OS push that one of the headsets he envisioned coming would be a fitness-focused headset. So that wouldn't be from Meta, but it would be from a different company, right? Who knows what company it could be? But the idea is that for these niche specific segments of the market, you can have these dedicated headsets if you have an OS that other manufacturers can use. But I mean, in a way, Quest 3 is a fitness headset right now, right? You can get a Quest 3 in Supernatural, and it's much more suitable for that than a Vision Pro. But you're right to say that if we do see Apple take some of the design choices from Vision Pro and change those to adapt to a more active use case, Vision Pro is very much so clearly designed for sitting down. If you do get a Vision Air that integrates the batteries into the side strap or into the headset somewhere, and you just put it on and it's lighter and it's more comfortable, and its materials are better designed for this, then yeah, I could absolutely see Apple expanding into that fitness space. And
yeah, and this is coming before we expect tens of millions. We've got that bet with Blair in our audience of what the Q4 revenue will look like from Meta. I think the number in my head is somewhere around 1.07 billion that we're going to see whether Meta makes more than or less than that in the final quarter of 2024 with a Quest 3 shipping and a Quest 3S shipping. Then I think when we see that number, Blair, as well as the rest of the audience, will start making decisions about where to skate for their next set of headsets. It's late, I guess, is what like we as viewers feel like everyone else is taking this up so slowly. Like, do you feel that, David? Like, shouldn't we have had a fitness headset tuned for fitness by now, or are we imagining things? Like, is it more important that they do general purpose computing first? But
I mean, I get what you're saying. It's the problem is that you do need to focus in some ways, right? And scope creep is a big problem at these companies. If Meta's trying to make a headset for fitness, then why not a headset for productivity? Why not a headset for media viewing? Quest 3 is supposed to be the jack of all trades and the master of none. And that means that you don't have to optimize around one segment of the market. You can focus all of your efforts into making the general purpose. And I mean, that's the whole point of the Horizon OS play, right? That somebody else can come along and do this, and Meta will provide all the software so it's ready to go. And there is a comment here from Shalalaska, I believe it was, saying you can't really get lighter than the Quest 3 without losing critical functionality. Well, I mean, of course you could. Just take a Quest 3 and put the battery in the rear, and there you go. You already got something that is better for fitness. But the problem is, if you have the battery in the rear, then you can't lie down or put your head against a chair, which means it's not as good for media watching and for certain sim racing chairs, for example. So there is actually an argument to be made for these purpose-built headsets. It's just I don't think it's reasonable that one company, Meta, would be the one to make them all. I think it's going to be a third-party play, just like we see in many other markets, right? But to be clear, the majority of people that are using headsets for fitness, even when the fitness headset comes out, are going to use it on a general purpose Quest. It's just because the cost
What I
higher for these other companies. Coming back to what we're saying about platforms, because they have to make a profit on the hardware, Meta does not.
say what I don't what I think we've what is so interesting, what we're going to watch in our reporting is how many of these companies actually deliver on their headsets with their plans with Meta. What we saw back in Windows was a whole bunch of companies try to build Windows-based headsets, and none of them could hold on to a sliver of the market share of anything else, of Steam or of anything. It was miserable. And then you also had this history in phones where Google started making its own phones eventually because of various market reasons, right? Like they needed to like grab back control of the platform and plan its future, give people updates at regular times. Uh, I have a hard time imagining manufacturers expecting it to go any other way than what they saw happen to Microsoft partners and what they saw happen to Google's partners over in mobile phones. There just doesn't feel like there's enough profit to go around once Apple starts sucking up all the hardware profit. If Apple keeps making the best products for specific product categories, let's say the best fitness headset that repeats what you said earlier, David, where it's $1,500 and it does fitness best at $1,500. You could have a Meta funded headset from Samsung come out, or from anyone, LG, come out and price itself at $1,500, and it would probably be lacking in certain respects compared to the Apple headset, where they've brought everything they possibly can into that specific price.
Sure, but there would be a market for a company to come along with an $800 headset that does almost as much as the $1,500 one for people that are price sensitive. I mean, that's why there is a tech industry beyond Apple, right? In many countries. Obviously, there are people who prefer it. I myself use an Android phone that costs the same as an iPhone. It's not that I do it for price reasons, it's that I prefer the experience. But generally amongst consumers, the trend is on a market scale that people pick the cheaper option than Apple because they're price sensitive rather than that they're actually making an active decision. And one thing about this idea of a fitness headset I want to bring up is that we actually saw a concept from HTC a long time ago. I think a lot of people have forgotten about this. It was just a concept, but HTC showed this off of their take on a fitness focused headset. So I wanted to show people this. So you see these sweat wicking materials, this kind of detachable design, with materials that are very much so designed around it. And then I think this is an image from the same concept. This Vive fitness headset. And I want to be crystal clear: concept, not a product.
I like this comment. I want non-Apple high-end standalone options. We got low-end and mid-covered. I think that's an excellent comment. I think that's what we would expect Google and Samsung to deliver. That
Absolutely.
appears to be their hole in the market. It's what they can do with the chipset. The question is, what services will Google really power on that device? How much power does Google have over those services? There's a lot available to Google. I mean, I'm staring at my Google Voice phone number that I've had for about 15 years and going, poking it with a stick, do something, do something. And that's what, Google has left that service as one of its few services that it hasn't killed. And here we are in VR where you can make phone calls and they can push back at WhatsApp and what Facebook is doing there. Don't launch a new service, take two of your old services and integrate them together and build them in VR, like, and drive them with avatars that are face tracked. Like, anyways, those are all great ideas for Google if they actually deliver on them. And I don't get the impression that there's anyone of vision pulling those pieces together for Google. So we'll have to see what they do.
Yeah, strongly agree with you to say that if you are looking for a premium but non-Apple headset, then that is exactly what we expect Samsung and Google to reportedly launch a developer kit for in October and then start selling in March, according to the reports that we've seen.
Well, I think we can debate more PSVR 2's future when Sony actually announces new things. Right now, it's the time to poke Sony with the stick. They've pushed out the PSVR 2 adapter out into the wild. It works, and we want more. We want more games. I put this question to David, right? Like, hypothetically, I would love to have a PSVR, a PS5 Pro with a disc reader on it, so that I can enjoy 4K Blu-rays in an OLED space in a headset, and then imagining games that were beautiful on a 4K display, imagining those in 100-inch screen in OLED glory on a PSVR 2 with the headset providing everything it possibly can, like for these amazing graphically intensive games, even on a flat screen. It's all
you can do that right now.
hypothetically wonderful.
You can do that right now. PSVR 2 has its cinema mode. The problem is this is a 2K Pro headset, and the first headset that we've seen that really does this well is Apple Vision Pro with those near 4K panels. It's just PSVR 2 just doesn't have the resolution to make this super compelling, in my opinion. But we'll have to see if there are future 4K headsets that can do this.
Well, the next few months promise to be transformative for the industry. We've covered a little bit on here with this show. We've got Pico lining up very soon. We have the Visor headset expected to show off its first public viewing. And then we've got Meta planning its Connect conference and latest updates in September. And then we, of course, would expect the build-up into CES and beyond as the products for next year are hype-driven. We'll see dev kits announced. We'll see prices hinted at. We'll see specs revealed over time, and all building into the next year of products that it's gonna be a completely different industry by this time next year. We'll have new headsets, new platforms, and a lot of surprises in store. So thank you for tuning in with us so far. Thank you for putting up with our tangents and going with us as we discover just how big of a computing platform we're actually going to get out of VR. It's I think an endless landscape. It's consuming everything in real time, and David has been so excellent, along with Henry Stockdale and Don Hopper, at just finding all the edges of VR, right? Like it's an expansive space that is going everywhere, and you and our audience are, I think, believers in that journey with us. Like if you're watching this show, I think you're starting to come around to the idea that VR really is transformative on the scale of things like the printing press. David, you've never answered Kent Bai's question where he comes and asks you about the true potential of VR. I want you to answer that question for me, David. What's the ultimate potential of VR?
That is a massive question to throw in the outro section of the show.
Well, all right, fine. Think about it, David, and come back at us in the future. Can I get your answer in the future, David?
Sure, yeah. Maybe not in our outro section, but at some point in the future.
All right. I'd love to see our comments on what you think the ultimate potential of VR is. If you haven't listened to Kent Bai's podcast, he asks all of his guests that question. I'm asking David that question. I'll ask all of you that question as well. So let us know in the comments. We'll see you in the future.
Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next week.